How's everybody doing? Today we're going to be focusing on a brand new and creative technique to grow your digital audience. And we'll be doing that by identifying the ad network or ad partner that provides you paid installs that retain the best. But instead of using traditional methods and comparing day 1, day 3, or day 7 retention between different ad networks or ad partners, we're going to be pioneering together a brand new and more effective approach. What we're going to be doing is per install cohort and ad network, we're going to be comparing the percentage of installs from their install date that have logged in consecutively. So what this solves for is it allows you to identify your ad network that has a large portion of their installs that have consecutive login activity. So what this does is it allows you to grow your digital audience with users that are logging in consecutively, like Tuesday, Wednesday, or Sunday, Monday, versus building a digital audience with sporadic user engagement where people are logging in maybe Monday and Friday and aren't as highly engaged as the installs that are logging in consecutively. So take this journey with me today and we will replicate this exact same analysis behind me in MySQL so that you can apply it to your own business. So let's go. Okay, so here we are in MySQL and we're going to be starting with a very simple installs table. And the first thing we want to do is just isolate paid installs. So we want to drop all organic installs and just focus on our paid install channels. So we will do where attribution network is not null. And I'll run a few records so we can make sure this worked. All right, I love what I see. So let's bring in a couple fields we need from this table. We're going to want the customer ID. We're going to want the attribution name, so the ad network name. We're also going to want the install date, and then we're going to add a window function here to help us identify the very first install instance per customer. So we'll do row number over partition by customer ID, and then we want to order the installs ascendingly, meaning the first install date time or install instance will receive a value of 1. That's where the index starts, and any subsequent install dates will have a 2, 3, 4, and so on. So we will do order by install date time. We'll call this the install index. That seems pretty good. Okay, let me zoom out so you can see what's going on. And let's run a few records. Okay, so here's a perfect example. We have a customer ID that installed twice. The first time in January of 2023 and then the second time in August of 2023. As you can see, the very first install instance received a value of 1, and then the second install received a value of 2. So we're going to be filtering for just installs that have a value of 1. Okay, so let's put all of this in a subselect here. So we will contain it in a subselect. We will just call this first install. So we want to bring the data up from this first install subselect. Okay, so let's grab it all right there. And then we will prefix these fields. so that our database knows which subselect this data is coming from. And then what we want to do is filter for just the very first install or very first install instance per customer. So where from this subselect, we want this field to equal 1. Okay, great. So if you recall in our analysis, we're looking at this metric over time. And as you can see, we're defining over time as days since install. So what that implies is we need to have at least a leading 365 days since our install date in order to do this analysis. So it's December 2024, so let's just take installs from November 2023 to ensure that there is leading data for us to do this analysis. So I will show you how to do this now. We're going to grab this install date right here. And we're going to do a date format on this and say whatever the install date is, just convert it to the first of the month. So we will do %. And then what we want to do is we want to set it to November 1st, 2023. So how do we do that? We're going to take the current date. And the current date as of this video is December 29, 2024. So it's going to take December 29, 2024 and convert it to December 1st, 2024. And then we want to do a date add and set the interval to -13 months. Meaning we're going to take December 1st, 2024 and subtract 13 months to get to November 1st, 2023. And we only want to keep installs that occurred in November 1st, 2023 per this statement right here, this entire statement. Okay, I will show you that worked by running a few records. Okay. So as you can see, if we look at the third column, all of these values here are installs that occurred sometime in November of 2023. So that month and that year. Okay, good stuff. So now we can continue on. We can just call this installs November. And we just want 3 fields. So let's copy all this stuff here. Move this up. Okay. Now in this next step, we actually need our leading dates. So we need all dates that are equal to the install date and stretch forward up through the present date. So we're going to join over to a date table to accomplish this. And let me show you how now. And this table is just called dim date. As you can see, here's our column of dates right here. And let's go ahead and do that join now. So we'll do a left join over to dim date. We can just call this entire table dates, and we'll do it on the dates. So referencing this table and then referencing this column, we'll say where the date is greater than or equal to basically our install date. So this join is going to expand our data set because we're taking one customer, one install date, which happened in November of 2023, and then we're expanding that to include all dates that are equal to or greater than that date, or in other words, those leading dates. I want to focus on just a customer example so that you can see visually what's going on after this join. So we will do a order by. Okay, so here we have a player ending in 536 that came in as a paid install on at network 17. They installed on November 23rd, 2023. And the first date that we brought across is the install date. And that's what we wanted, right? And it's coming across because of this equal sign here, greater than or equal to. And then we have all the leading dates after that. We have the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th. And with this information, we're going to be able to do a date diff between the install date and this date here in order to get day since install, which is the x-axis of the chart or the analysis we were looking at earlier. So let's remove this order by because we're good here. And let's just call all of this leading dates. And we're going to want to bring up the fields from our previous subselect. So let's do that now. It'll be customer ID. It'll also be the attribution name. It'll also be, after that, it's going to be the install date. And then all those leading dates. Okay. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is for each one of these leading dates, what we want to ask is, did this player log in on this date and on the previous date? Because that would represent to us a consecutive login, meaning they logged in on November 24th and they logged in on November 23rd, their install date, meaning that they've logged in consecutively on back-to-back days. So that's what we're going to accomplish in the next join. It's actually pretty exciting because I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but it's highly useful the way we're going to do this. So we actually have a table of customer logins. It's called fact player logins. So and here it is. It's just customer and their login dates. So again, what we're going to do is join over to this fact player logins table, which represents customers and their different login dates. And we're going to be asking a very fundamental question, which is, hey, did you log in on this date and the day before this date? Because if you did, we're going to mark that or flag that as a consecutive login. And we'll know that this install coming in on this ad network has consecutive login activity. Okay, so I'll show you how to do this now. It's pretty creative and I do kind of love the method. So we're going to do a left join over to fact player logins. We'll do it on leading dates dot customer ID equals logins dot customer ID. And here's the fun part. the logins dot login date has to be equal to our leading date, and the field is just called date. Or our login date has to be equal to the day before that specific leading date. So we will do a date add, and then we will do an interval -1 day. Okay, great. So here's what we did. We were joining on customer between these two tables, and then what we're doing is at most bring across 2 records per record in our first table. And that is represented in if the login date is equal to this date or equal to the day previous to this date. So at the most, it can bring back 2 records per record in this first table, or the first table in the join. So how are we going to handle this? Because we don't want to necessarily expand our first table. So we're going to add an aggregate function, and we're going to say, I want to do a count distinct. I want to do a count distinct on these login dates. So what's actually happening is this join, when it gets executed, will at most bring across 2 records, but those 2 records are going to be collapsed because we're going to be grouping by this, and the only thing we're going to be doing from the 2 records coming from table 2 is doing a count distinct of login dates. And if you're jumping ahead, you'll know that if we count 2 distinct values or 2 different login dates, we know that this user or customer logged in both on this date and the day before this date, which would represent the consecutive login activity that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and group this. Okay, and let's run a few test records with this. Let's close out this parentheses here, and now we'll be able to run those test records. Okay, awesome. So I didn't name this 5th column here, so we'll just call this login days. But what I will show you is hopefully we can rerun this and get an example where the value is equal to 2. And actually, I can ensure that by putting this in the halving clause. Because I am very big on visually understanding the inner mechanics of what's happening to our data set as we take these steps to slightly alter or change it. Okay, so we have plenty of examples to look at now. So we have an example right here. We have a player with the number 3000 ending their customer ID. So customer ending in 3000 was a paid install given to us by Ad Network 14. They installed November 18th, 2023. And you can see that the leading date value is November 22nd, 2023. And you can see this value is 2. So what does this value of 2 mean? So this 2 means that this customer logged in both on the 22nd and the 21st, which to us represents a consecutive login. So we're going to flag it as so in our next step. So let's do that together. We're going to get rid of this. We don't need the limit or the having filter anymore. So we will take this and call this consecutives. So let's bring up the fields like we always do. We're going to do this, and we don't need that prefix anymore. We actually need a new one. The new prefix is going to be called consecutives, and we'll put it up here. And we will just copy it for these other fields. And then for this one, we're just going to add a case statement here and just say case when consecutives login days equals 2, then 1, else 0 end. We will call this consecutive logins. Consecutive login. And I promise after this, we only have 2 more steps and we'll be ready to move this over to Excel. So, but first, let's run a few test records, make sure the syntax is correct with the SQL. Okay, looks like everything appears to be working. So let's take this over to the next step. We're going to once again wrap all of this in a very large subselect and call it, just call it players. It can be generic. And we want all of these fields. So going to rename this to players. Players. And what we need to do next is actually create a second flag. So right now, our query or query logic is iteratively going through each of these leading date values and checking, hey, did you log in on this date and the day before this date? If so, let's flag it as a 1. So you're going to see a very checkered data set where for the same player and for their leading dates, you're going to see, oh, they consecutively logged in on this date or on this one, but not this one or on this one. What we're ultimately checking for is if by this date they've consecutively logged in either on this date or any time previous to that. So this current record or any historical records, we're just looking for one instance of a consecutive login. And if so, we can mark them as a player that's had at least some consecutive login activity by this date due to either a consecutive login on this date or a date previous to this date. So let's make that addition now. There's actually a great window function that can accomplish this for us. I actually saved it down here, so let me go ahead and grab it. And we're going to do this. We're going to say, hey, I want to take the max consecutive login value. So this field only has potential values of 1 or 0. So again, this is our 5th field. And the values are either 1 or 0, and we want to take a max on this field, and we want to do it for every player, and we want it ordered by the days since install, and it needs to include the current record and all previous records. So the one thing that is missing is adding the day since install field. So let's just backtrack and go to the previous subselect and then just add it in there. So we'll do this date diff between this leading date and this install date. It's going to represent days since install. Okay, so we're taking a max on this consecutive login field, this fifth column in our data set, and we're doing it by each player, and we're ordering it by days since install, which we have. Let's make sure we add this column as well. And we're doing it between the current row and all previous rows. We'll call it max consecutive login. That works for me. And what we're going to do is, let's look at a player example together. We'll say where we know that they've had at least one consecutive login date. And what we probably want to do is order the result set by days. Actually, I don't think that's possible since we have an active window function in our current query. It would have to be a nested subselect, I believe. So let's just try this out and see what we get. Okay, great. So we have exactly what we're looking for. We have a player, we have their day since install, we have their install date, we have the leading date and the date value, and then we have two flags. This first one represents, hey, on this date, did they log in on this date, November 21st and the 20th? If so, mark this as 1. And we also have this second flag right here, which says, hey, has this player on November 21st or any time previous to that logged in consecutively, just one time? Doesn't have to be this time. It can be, but it can also be any time previous to November 21st, 2023. So great. We are almost done. All we need to do is aggregate this data. So I'm going to wrap this, and we're just going to call this very simply ag. Okay, we want the ag days since install, since that represents our x-axis. And then we also want the ad network, call it attribution name. We're just going to do a simple count of installs. And then all we need to do is basically just sum these max consecutive login records. So let's add our prefix here. We'll call this installs with consecutive login activity. So we basically used a flag to create another flag in this example walkthrough. So let's go ahead and group this, and then we'll be almost ready to visualize our data and kind of see the strategic insights. Awesome. And don't worry, I'm going to be including both the Excel and MySQL practice files so you can see all of this in its entirety. All right, we're now running everything. Awesome, here we are. So here's our final data set. We have days since install. We also have the ad network or ad partner that this paid install came in on. We have the count of installs by those two dimensions that we group by. And then we have the count of installs that have consecutive login activity happening on either this date, 7 days from install, or sometime previous to that. So you'll notice that when days since install is 0, so that when the install date and the leading date value are the same value, we have 0 installs with consecutive login activity. Well, that's because it's their install date. It's the first time they're interacting with their online business, so they haven't logged in on the day previous to their install date. So this value is always going to be 0. So because of that, let's just go ahead and filter it out. We will say where the days since install is greater than 0. All right, so here's our data after dropping the days since install of 0. So let's go ahead and finish this up in Excel. All right, so here we are in Excel. The only thing we need to do is create a 5th column, just a quick calculated column. We can call it % installs with consecutive login activity. All right, cool. So all we need to do is literally take the installs with consecutive logins and just divide it by the total number of installs. And we get the running percentage that we need by day since install and ad network or ad partner. So let's transpose this data a little bit just in a pivot table. So we will do that. We will do days since install, attribution name, % installs with consecutive login activity. Let's go to design and just remove the rows and columns. And then we'll remove blanks. And then let's do a label filter. We will say less than or equal to, just take the leading 365 days is fine. And let's turn this into a percentage because that's the percentage of the install cohort that has had consecutive login activity by this day since install value. All right. Okay, awesome. This is great. So I'm just going to explain this chart in analysis first, and then I'll go into the strategic value next. So what you can do is on this x-axis, you can pick any value, 91. So 91 days from install, we have 33% of these installs from this ad network that have had at least one consecutive login day or have logged in on 2 back-to-back days. It didn't have to be on this exact date, 91 days from install. It could have happened anytime previously or historically. So it's computed in a cumulative fashion. As you see, all of these trend lines are moving up together. So what is interesting about this is, as you know, in the mobile games industry, day one retention is about, call it 25 to 35%. So what that means is of all people that install, 25 to 35% come in on the next day. So this is why all of these trend lines start between 20 to 30, 35%, because day one is the day after install. So we have a lot of people that installed, and 20 to 35% of them came in on the next day, which is day one retention. And then from there, these ad networks are moving upwards cumulatively. So going into the strategic value of an analysis like this is right now in the mobile games industry, people are just comparing ad network performance by day one retention, day three retention. Okay, so for me, what's much better and much more effective is to look at all of these ad networks and look at them comparatively and look at the percentage of their installs that have logged in consecutively over time and cumulatively. Because ultimately, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a mobile game where you're trying to build a digital audience that's extremely sticky, where you have players that are logging in on back-to-back days, a Monday, Tuesday, a Thursday, Friday. You don't want to build a digital audience where you only have extremely casual or sporadic users or sporadic logins, where someone logs in on a Monday and then doesn't log in until the following Saturday. So this analysis really helps you to identify and pick out the winning ad networks that'll give you a really strong, sticky digital audience with a really good DAU-MAU ratio. And in this example, you can see that that's these two ad networks up here, the yellow one and the orange one. That's ad networks 12 and ad networks 10. And what you can see is that more than 35% of installs from those ad networks have at least one consecutive login day, whereas the other ad networks are about 20% lower. So as a marketer or someone who's managing a mobile games user acquisition budget, you can reallocate or move more of your budget or your spend to ad networks 12 and 10, knowing that those installs are going to retain about 20% better than the average. So I hope this tutorial was useful. I'm super excited that I got to share this new and creative technique with you, and I hope it helps your business or helps the goals set out before you. Thank you very much for listening.